record it as a video.
Secret thing plan here that I would have this GI Bill and I put myself through school. So I went on active duty. I went to basic training after I finished nursing school and basic training, 8 weeks at Fort Sam Houston in Texas. And then I was ordered, they put me on orders to Walter Reed here in Washington, D.C. So I showed up at Reed and I worked in the recovery room ICU, taking care of pretty freshly wounded veterans, or not veterans, they were active duty soldiers there for revamping of their more surgical procedures and many, I worked long hours, I worked different hours, I took care of, triple amps, bilateral amps, head wounds, just the atrocities of war. And after a few months there, 10 months actually, and I only had about a year left, and I didn't think I'd get on orders. It was 1970. So the war was standing down a bit. 68, was the height of the war, where we were sending 1,000 dead bodies home a month. We were losing 1,000 young soldiers a month dead. And I don't know how many more than that wounded. So, but by 70, anyway, the Army thought differently and they put me on orders to Vietnam. So that's a whole story, but it was very tough getting those orders by myself. I traveled out to Travis Air Force Base and I didn't have a ticket. I remember they said, I reported there and they said, well, do you have a ticket? I said, no, I don't have a ticket. Oh, we'll get you a ticket. No problem. They put me on an airplane to Hawaii and then Guam and then to Saigon with a couple hundred GIs and me. And I landed in Saigon. I landed here in Cameron Bay, and they kept me here in a hut like that had concertina wire and a guard. And I didn't know if they were guarding me or if the guard was guarding me to keep in or keeping the bad guys out. But I stayed there for 3 days. They got me, I had to get uniforms of fatigues and I reported to the chief nurse of Viet Nam in Saigon, and she ordered me to DaNang, the 95th Evac Hospital up here in DaNang. And so I got on an airplane again, a C-140, if you've ever heard of C-140. It's a cargo Army plane, no seats in it, and they just load you in, and they loaded me in again with another couple hundred or 100, I don't know, a lot of GIs. They were reporting to their duty, and they'd stop every little once in a while in these different places, and then they got me up to DaNang. And from there, anyway, I went over to the hospital, 95th Evac. I took transportation, but I wanted to show you, see, we're right on the water. We were right on the South China Sea, and we were just south of Hue and Khe Sanh. You've probably heard of Khe Sanh, maybe you have, the Battle of Khe Sanh, and this is the DMZ. So we were pretty close to the DMZ, the demilitarized zone that separated between North Vietnam and South Vietnam. So you couldn't get sent much further north as a nurse or a healthcare provider. There was one other hospital up here in Hue, the 18th Surge, a smaller hospital, but we were pretty far north. So anyway, I reported to this hospital, and you see the fancy sign out here, 95th Evac Hospital. And these are fishing villages. So we were right on the edge of the ocean, and it was surrounded by Vietnamese fishing villages. Not very fancy. And this is a picture of our helipad. So all our wounded came in via helicopter and from the field, directly from the field. We were taking care of directly wounded GIs, and this is the hospital here. These huts or something. And these buses were, once we stabilized them, 2 or 3 days, whatever it took to stabilize them, we would then load them up in the buses and they would take them down to the airport in DaNang, and they would medevac them out to Camp Tinshaw. These are our barracks here where we lived. Um, so at least the good news about it all is that they were permanent structures. And we had air conditioning, we had electricity, and we had running water most of the time. We would have that all the time. So it wasn't like a tent, like if you've seen China Beach, or what is it? Is it China Beach? The movie MASH. They were intense, but this hospital had been there for 3 years. So by this time they had a permanent structure. And you see, here's the helicopter landing. This is a corpsman going out there, getting a patient, bringing him back in, and bring a patient through these doors into the pre-op and the receiving area, receiving the wounded. That's what that word now means. Receiving, or then meant receiving them. And here's the gurneys. Send them out on the gurneys. And here's what it looked like. The sawhorses, you'd pull out the sawhorse and put the stretcher on there and start taking care of them. This is me, believe it or not, looking very tired. It must have been on a day off. I don't know who took the picture, but it's the only one I have to give you a sense of what this area looked like. It's essentially the emergency room, right, that we call here, but we begin working on them here. This is one of our corpsmen. My corpsman, you can see we used IV bottles. This is the tourniquet, and then our supplies back here. Let's see, is this, yeah, okay. So you bring them in, put them on the stretcher, cut off their uniforms. I had big scissors to take off their uniforms. I'd assess their wounds, but I'd start IVs on them. And and then I'd throw a blood pressure cuff on them, see if I can get a blood pressure on them. If they were so hypovolemic, I would put their head down, and I could start an external jugular. So the big thing about this was starting IVs, pumping the fluids in. I would do a femoral stick on them, their femoral artery, get the blood, send it across the lab. They would give them 2 units of blood. I'd start pumping that blood in. Isn't just me. I mean, the corpsman, I might have another nurse, and I had a physician. We were all working together as a team. And we would give them O-neg blood, and then with that tube, they could type them for type specific. So if I needed more than that, next blood they could send over would be type specific. This is our call roster, just to give you a sense of what we had for physicians. We had orthopods, general surgeries, we had an eye doctor, ENT, psychiatrist, and we had anesthesia. We had nurse anesthetist and a physician, not always, but some of the time. And this is our physician group outside of the barracks. And so we had about 30 physicians, 60 nurses, and about 100 corpsmen. This is my group. We worked the ER, we worked the receiving. And so that's me there, and that's Chrissy and Sarah, and this is our head nurse, Captain Tate. But we wore the scrub tops. Only we wore the scrub tops because we were dealing with the blood, and we did not wear gloves. We had no gloves. So only in the OR did they use gloves, but we didn't. So I used to soak my hands at the end of every shift, and this is us, my head nurse. I like Colonel Mahoney and Sarah and Annie. I'm giving the peace sign there. And this is Chrissy, Annie, and myself, and a corpsman there. One of our docs and me, again, very tired. If anyone ever asked me, how did you feel or whatever, I was tired. We worked 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week, 7 to 7 or 7 to 7. Now, these were our liaisons. So there was a Marine liaison, a Vietnamese Army liaison here. And they would log the patients in and get in touch with their units, and all that kind of stuff. Of course, we didn't have any computers, but we had a log book. So whoever job it was, they whether it was the Marines or the Army or the Vietnamese civilians, there was somebody that would log them into that book, and that was the only way we had a sense of how many patients we saw every day. And sometimes people ask me, well, how many patients did you see? I remember one day we saw 50 patients. That
Wow.
was the busiest, and most of them were Vietnamese civilians. At least half of our patients were Vietnamese civilians. And this is Min, my very good friend Min, Vietnamese, and a wonderful nurse. And she was our liaison who would log all the Vietnamese people in, and of course could speak the language, which I couldn't. And so, of course, she was just essential to us, and she was just a dear. She's the one person I wish I had been able to somehow keep in touch with when we left. This is showing patients that they're getting ready to medevac them out of the hospital down to the Vietnamese hospital. And we knew with the Vietnamese, we did everything we could for them because we knew that they would get very limited care. Look at that little one, see?
Mm.
And Annie, Chrissy, and I, of course, we were nurses. We were not nurse practitioners. We were fresh out of school practically, but we started a kids' clinic, if you want to think about it that way. And the word got out in the street that they could come by in the mornings with an abscess or laceration. And here, this kid, I'm soaking his foot, and he's teaching me how to write his name. And I'm probably suturing up a hand here of one of the kids. A lot of orphans just out there running on the streets.
Mm.
This is a typical ward with our GIs, and these guys would be there and they'd either go back to their unit or they would be medevaced. They didn't stay with us long. It's Chrissy kind of taking a tour, taking pictures. And they says this is a bunker, right? So we had a bunker right outside our hooch, our room. Anesthesiologist here, ENT, and so if they had a red alert, a fire, or an alert, I had a helmet under the bed and a flak jacket, and I put the helmet, flak jacket on, and go into this bunker that I didn't like to do because snakes really like, and I really didn't like snakes over there, but they like anyway, yeah, so that could happen. This is my hooch, and it was about an 8 by 10. There was a cot in there and a chair, fold up chair. And this was last occupied by an orthopod. You know, they're very good with saws and hammers and things. And he put a window in here. So it was seaside room here. And there's Chrissy. You could get a sense of, and this is our officers club. My camp, I keep in touch with him and a couple of other, he's the psychiatrist and a couple of other psychiatrists and Annie. I mean, Chrissy there. And of course, I kept in touch with Chrissy afterwards until she died. And she got about 10 or 15 years ago, she got a weird leukemia that probably was related to exposure to the Agent Orange. Um, and and people ask me, well, was it like MASH? Was it anything like MASH? And I said, well, maybe I could do a 1 hour movie about MASH. So, like, for instance, you know, here we are dressed up as cheerleaders, the pom-poms made out of Mama San brooms, and the t-shirts, and so we're cheering for the Dogs versus the Corpsmen in a basketball game. And then this is another day where we went and visited a Vietnamese orphanage in
Mm.
DaNang. Look at all those beautiful kids, huh? So, and we would go there. Remember, we went down to the Vietnamese hospital in DaNang. And so just kind of give you, oh, this is John Robleski. He was one of our docs. So in the receiving area, we always had a physician, an emergency room physician, an ERP. Is that what we called them? I guess so. So he at least was a partially trained surgeon. So he knew what he was doing. John did. He was very helpful. But some of them that they would send us were not very helpful. And of course, you had
Mm.
to train them because I'd been there longer than they had. So, but anyway, John was very good. He was from New York. Oh, and he had us somehow leave the hospital compound in civilian clothes. Yeah, which was not legal. but we went on top. We were up on Monkey Mountain here, where they had the ARVN, the Vietnamese military TV station. So we went in there and took in for a tour, and they wanted us to be the weather girls. And I said, no, I have a job. Thank you. This is the real China Beach.
Oh, wow.
It was just gorgeous. I wish you could get a better sense of, and we would go on our days off, the docks, we would make our way down to China Beach. We had to find a vehicle. We didn't drive. Nobody, of course, as a woman, I couldn't drive. Nobody had vehicles. So I could go out to the gate and flag down a truck or something in uniform. I had to be in uniform. And then the driver had to agree to take me to my destination. I couldn't just say, well, just take me down the street. No. And so that's how I would get to China Beach. And that's what we usually did on our day off. And I remember the lifeguard here. I don't know if I have a picture. He was in the Air Force. And I said to him, I remember, how'd you get this job? All right, that's what I did in Vietnam. So, what was it like coming home? And it was tougher coming home than going over. And and going over was tough, but coming
Jane,
home was, yes,
do you mind if we just take a couple questions about your time
yes,
in Vietnam and this transition space?
yeah, that would be
Um,
fine.
I know that a lot of people on this call did read The Women. That's how we were initially thinking, oh, this will be a book discussion, but then we hit the jackpot and met somebody like you. So we want to hear your story. But I am curious from our conversation the other day, where were things congruent with your experience in The Women, and where were things, maybe not accurately told in a way that was similar to your experience?
Right, right. The nurse there, oh, yeah.
Oh, it started going quick again.
Yeah, no, I'm okay. I'm doing it. So when I read the book, it did seem a bit embellished. And a couple of things that jumped out at me was the fact that all of a sudden, and she's new like me, a pretty new nurse, and this doc sees something in her and says she's very special and she's got to come in and work with him in the operating room. And in my experience, OR nurses were OR nurses. You couldn't just become an OR nurse. You were trained in the United States for 6 months. You worked in the OR. You learned all those instruments and everything else and how to do sterile things and stuff. So that was really and then she's suturing up a belly or something. And it's like, no, that to me was not realistic. And the fact that seemed like she worked in three different places. She worked on a ward, then she was in the OR, and then she was down and receiving the wounded. I think she was doing that too. So she was very busy, and most of it that that didn't usually happen. Now I did start out in the ICU for a couple of weeks, and then the head nurse, moved me down to the receiving to take care of the wounded coming in. So that was a little embellished. And then, of course, the fact that she had three boyfriends, that was a little much too. And of course, one of them was dead, another one was POW, you know.
Was there romance though? I mean, did some romance happen?
Yeah, no, every one of us had someone. Well, I don't know everyone. I don't know. I mean, the nurses that I knew, we all had someone we fell in love with over there.
Hmm.
And yeah, right. But there were friends too. I remember Mike, the psychiatrist. He used to watch Christy and I and Annie walking home from work after 12 hours taking care of the wounded. We're walking back to our hooches, and Mike was up on the second floor, and he'd yell down to us, and say, "Come on up, come on up." And I thought, he's a psychiatrist. Maybe he'll help us deal with the atrocities and things we were dealing with. And we came up and he mixed us. He said, "You want a gin and tonic?" He mixed us a gin and tonic. That's how Mike helped us, the psychiatrist. It was tough. It was tough. So I think, I don't know what else about, but about what she did over there. What was in the book and what we really did over there.
I remember you mentioning the hooch situation that you didn't share a room, I think you said.
Right. Yeah, that seemed a little far-fetched. Two other women. I mean, first off, what we had heard, because I got there in 70, that as an officer, we had our own room. All officers had their own room. And secondly, we were women. I mean, I felt protected there. I mean, I never felt, and I don't know if you've heard stories about women being raped and all of that. And I never was feared for that at all. Um, in the Army too, you have these rules that enlisteds don't, franchise friendly with the officers, and you sort of keep that boundary going. So the enlisted barracks were not that far away at all, but I never went into the enlisted barracks. And the enlisted were never allowed over into our barracks, the officers' barracks. And we each had our own officers' club. And there was officers' club and enlisted club. So you still followed these kind of rules that the military had. But yeah, I didn't have two roommates. I had my own little hooch with a cot in it. But that was probably, it was considered pretty high living, not bad.
And Chrissy was one of your dear friends that you kept from your experience, it sounds like.
Yes, yes, I kept in touch with Chrissy and Annie. Yep. And yeah, and you didn't know. I mean, when you left, I was on when you everybody left at a different time. You didn't leave together, so we were always going to a party. So we had a party place. A couple of the docs knocked down some walls of their hooches, and we made it. They made it into a party place, and of course we would go over and up. It was upstairs, and we'd put on little skits, I think, or something, to say goodbye to whoever we were saying
Mm.
goodbye to. And then at the end, we'd all stand in a circle and we would sing a song. This is nurses and docs, and sing, You've Got a Friend.
Mm.
And then we would pound on the floor, peace now, peace now.
Wow.
And underneath us was the XO of the hospital. Well, anyway, we got reported to Saigon, and they came out and did an investigation that we were having an anti-Vietnam War demonstration going on. We did it on top of the bunkers one night. I wasn't there, but I still got named. But so anyway, yeah. Yeah, so we would kind of do that and did the best we could in the day. But we got very close to each other. We didn't know we were very close, but we did helped each other through this, and we didn't know when we were going to be leaving. I mean, we knew our dates, our personal dates, although my date got shortened because I wrote a letter, and it's a long story, but I wrote a letter to my senator, Ted Kennedy, and said I wanted to get out early so I could start school, not miss that fall semester. And because I had put my paperwork in and I got accepted to a couple of universities, I'd done everything, but my paperwork disappeared, and my it disappeared. So I went to the IG, blah, blah, blah. So then he didn't do anything. So I wrote to Kennedy. 6 days later, the chief nurse comes running down the hall there and says, McCarthy, go pack your bags. You're out of here.
Oh my goodness.
And that's how I left Vietnam. I didn't have any goodbye party. And John Robleski there took me to the airport in DaNang, and off I went.
Wow.
So I didn't get to say goodbye to anyone, really.
Thank you for sharing that, especially that story about you all gathering together and your goodbye parties. And so,
I think we didn't say it out loud, but I think we realized we were not, we meaning the dog, all of us. Many of the corpsmen, were COs, conscientious objectors, and that's how they got to be corpsmen. And the docs were, you know, drafted into the HPSP system where they had to do 2 years in the military and that kind of stuff. So none of us were warriors at all. We, of course, right. We were there to heal and to
mm,
help and to get, and we didn't, so we didn't fit in this war, but we knew we had to be there, and we knew we had to do the most we could do to save lives, get them home. So anything else? So now coming home, um, I mean, I could go on with this. So you heard the beginning of my coming home. That's how I left. I got on a plane in DaNang and went down to Cameron Bay. That's where you had to leave from. And by that time, they were doing drug testing. They just started during my time over there because of the heroin problem. You know, the soldiers were, so many of them were on heroin, and they would come in to me in the ER there and ask for help and say to me, look, I'm on DEROs, I'm on orders. Within 2 weeks, I'm supposed to go home. I need to get off of this heroin. And we had very little to offer them. The psychiatrist wouldn't take them, and so I would lock them up between the stretchers. I remember I would wrap, and then I'd give them a shot of Thorazine in their arm and hope that they would rest. And in the morning, let them go on their way. I mean, we had so little to offer them. So anyway, during that time when I was there, they opened up a detox center because they were going into detoxing on the planes, and they were hurting themselves and hurting others. So they decided, okay, we're going to test everybody, and then we're going to detox them here for 3 or 4 days, or I don't know how long. So they tested everybody down there in Cameron Bay. They tested me, and they were so excited that my test came up positive, that they caught an officer. But when they tested me, anyway, they found Benadryl because I was taking Benadryl to help me sleep. The night shift, you have to sleep in the day. So anyway, I left out of Cameron. I don't think anybody knew I was coming home or anything. And 26 hours. Oh, and I had to dress up in my summer cords uniform, which is a skirt and jackets, pantyhose, and black heels, high heels, on the airplane for 26 hours.
Hmm.
And by the time we landed back in Travis Air Force Base, I land. I mean, I'm with a couple hundred GIs. Most of us are just getting out of the military. I'm getting out. So they started processing me. I walked around, couldn't even put my shoes on because my feet were so swollen. And I walked around the different buildings to do the paperwork and the processing out of the Army. And then I came to this last guy, and he hands me a couple $1,000, and he says, here you go. You're free. And I said, well, where do I go? And he said, well, where do you live? And of course, when you think about it, I think back on it now, I didn't have a home. I mean, right? I had given up my place in Washington. And so I said, well, I guess my parents are in Massachusetts. I'm still only 22 years old.
Hmm.
And so he said, well, then I would go to the airport. Where's the airport? 25 miles down the road. Okay, how do I get to the airport? Well, you could catch a cab. So I went and got a cab, went to the airport, and I'm doing all this. Mind you, I hadn't slept in a couple of days, and I get to the airport, and I remember this, and I walk in there. There are all these civilian people in regular clothes, and they're like having a normal life. And I'm like, and I just started crying. I'm like, don't you know there's a war going on? There's guys dying, and you guys are
Hmm.
just going on? And I didn't say it, but it was like, it hit me. It just really, really hit me. But I got on the plane, finally got myself home. And I mean, a lot happened in between that. Had to stop and see the dean. Of course, I saw the old boyfriend because you always leave a boyfriend. I had a left one here, and then I had another one there. And I had to see the dean of the Indiana University, Purdue University at Indianapolis. That was a school I was going to go to, that I was coming home early for, right? And she interviewed me. Oh, remember, I haven't had sleep in so long. I only stayed there one semester, and I saw in my form, she said, if McCarthy ever does get herself together, she'll probably do very well in school or something. So, and then I went home or to Cohasset to my parents, and that didn't go well. They didn't understand. I mean, I remember sitting on the back steps with my father, and he asked me something, and I said something, and I started crying. And he yells into my mother, "She's crying. I think just make her a good meal. I make her a good steak out there, and she'll be fine." And I'm like,
Mhm.
"Oh God, what am I going to do?" So, and I didn't know that I had PTSD. It hadn't even been invented yet.
Mhm.
I just knew I was very depressed. I was very reliving, and I didn't sleep. So anyway, I got the car I ordered and drove out to Indianapolis, and I got an apartment there with the old boyfriend, but not with him. He helped me get my apartment, and that was a very tough one semester there. And I went back to church, Catholic church, and my mother told me I was eligible for a general confession because I'd been in war. So I called this priest and I told him my story, and he said, "Yes, I can see you." And I'm thinking he's going to say, "Come next week on Tuesday or something." And I said, "Well, when would you like to see me?" And he said, "How about now?" And that's when I got, I think he thinks there's something going on here. So I went over to see him, and he saw me a couple of times a week for several weeks until I left. I mean, he got me enough together so that I could pack up again, and I moved out to Colorado where my friends were, Chrissy and Annie and Jerry, and there were about 10 of us that either they were stationed there or they were there, um, doing our own methods. Some of us were going to school, college, back to school. Some of us, I remember Jane Gallivan went into modeling. Um, I don't know. But most of us avoided nursing.
Mm.
That was hard to do once when we got out. But so anyway, I had this group of friends from Vietnam, and we would just get together and just talk and talk and talk and talk like we had never talked about stuff that we never talked about in Vietnam. Because I remember in Vietnam, we never talked about a patient. And I thought that was interesting because as a nurse, you always talk about, you have nursing patient meetings, never talked about it, but we did there. And so that was part of my healing process for sure. So I was there 3 years. And so healing, meaning healing from I didn't sleep, I didn't eat, I lost a lot of weight. I had hypervigilance. Oh, did I have hypervigilance? Like if a bomb went off or something, or loud noise, I'd be on the ground. Um, And the nightmares were always about I was back in Vietnam. I was back there in the middle of the blood and gore, taking care of
Mm.
this. That was the same recurring dream I would have. So anyway, I finished up my degree there, came back to Washington, D.C. to go to nurse anesthesia because that was my 5-year plan, get the college degree, 3 years, and then go 2 more years to become a nurse anesthetist because I got the guts. This looked like I could do. Anyway, I went to anesthesia school, practiced anesthesia for a few years. But I had episodes of depression during that time. And I would say I became a workaholic. I worked and worked in school. And then I went on for my doctorate. Anesthesia wasn't enough. I thought, I need more. I need more. And I went into a basic science doctoral program at the Uniformed Services University. And in 81, no, 91, when they invaded, when they dropped those bombs in Iraq, I I really at that time, right, right. I was working for FDA, and the war started, and I fell apart. And by that time, I'm married. I have a 2-year-old, and I'm working at FDA as a scientist. And so I just had this thing of I had to hold my breath until they stopped the bombing, and I knew I couldn't live if I did that. But And so I knew I needed to have help, and called out to Chrissy, who was in California, and got some very serious psychiatric help then with a psychoanalyst. But I think so this was the 93. with the dedication of the Viet Nam Nurses Memorial. This is a picture of the Nurses Memorial here. And so we had in 81 or 83, anyway, they had the dedication of the wall, the Viet Nam Memorial. And the GIs were out there and cheering. And I was down at that one too. And then in 93 was this dedication of the Nurses Memorial. And for this, we all walked. I say march, but we weren't marching. We were walking. And in front of each group was the name of our hospital. See, that one's the 95th Evac. And it was very quiet. And we walked down Constitution Avenue, and the GIs were lined up on the vets on the side of the road. It was very quiet with their, wheelchairs and every once in a while, you'd hear one yell out, "Oh, that's my hospital. You took care of me."
Mm.
And that just, it was eerie. It was different. This was a different, but I think it was very healing for all of us. For all of us. Look, you see hundreds and hundreds of nurses, Vietnam nurses showed up. And it's interesting because you mentioned this, that some people had no idea that there were any women in Vietnam. Well, look at us. There were lots and lots of us. And this is Chrissy here and myself. Um, so then more recently, and I told you how I healed. I did psychoanalysis for like 5 years. And when I came out of that, it was like, I don't know, I think I got this idea. I wanted to get involved. I mean, I don't know. That sounds too cerebral or something. I got more involved in the veterans work here in where I live in Montgomery County, and I joined so I got involved, and that seemed to be therapeutic. And this is where they asked me to be the speaker, the keynote speaker at the Memorial Day program in Washington at the wall. So this is the actual real wall there. And this is my friends and colleagues and family at the Nurses Memorial, Vietnam Memorial there. And then I come back, I still go home each Memorial Day. I missed it that year, but to march in the Memorial Day parade. And I do Memorial Day because I want people to remember the high costs of war.
Mm.
And it's my action, my walking, my way of saying Memorial Day means something. And this is what it means. We have to remember the high costs of war. And this is a couple of friends of mine from high school that did make it back. And then another fellow that he was a nurse over there. And again, we have a wonderful memorial there, and naming all the guys that were killed in Vietnam, which is a lot for this tiny little town. So I'm going to end with this poem that that was published, and I don't know who wrote it. I'm thinking it's anonymous, and I'm thinking it was a GI that was wounded in Vietnam, a soldier, and it was published in this book that came out for the dedication of the Women's Memorial. And it's called Angel in War. Listen now, I've a story to tell about some women who lived through hell. They came to war not with guns to fight, but only a smile to brighten their life. Listen now to this story I tell about these women who lived through hell. Theirs is a story of pain and strife, and of men's agony and fight for life. She will tell you stories of blood and pain that in her mind will always remain. Listen now to this story I tell about these women who lived through hell. For they were young, like you and me. How much more special can they be? How many young men did she see die, while at night in her tent she could only cry? How many hands in the night did she hold, while a young voice cried out, I'm so cold? Listen now, and you will see how she fought the war like you and me. How many faces does she still see, like the memories we have, both you and me? Listen now to the stories they tell. These are the women who lived through hell. She was like a sister we could not see, but she brought happiness to some, you see. They fought in the war by our side, and like our sisters, they often cried. Let us not forget the stories they tell, for they were our sisters who lived through hell. And that's it. There.
Thank you for sharing that poem. It's hard to follow up anything with that.
Mhm. I'm sure it's hard because you all are obviously very, very caring, compassionate people to be doing the work that you do. And so you can feel what the feelings.
Thank you, Jane, for sharing from your story. There's mostly in the chat just a lot of gratitude. I'm scanning it to see if there's a question from what you've already shared, and then maybe we can just have a time where people can ask. Um, or so it looks like one person
Here's,
asked
mhm.
how your family reacted when you decided to serve. In the story, the women, they really disapprove of Frankie's decision to serve. And how did your family react?
Well, I was concerned about it. Well, here's the interesting thing about it is guys were being drafted at 18 years old, right? Right out of high school. I was 20, but this Army recruiter told me I had to have my parents sign to give their permission to go into the Army. And so I had to bring these papers home to my parents and have them sign it. And I remember kind of strategizing that a bit, how do I play on them to get them to? And my father was a World War II veteran, and so anyway, I was hoping I was pulling on his patriotism or whatever you want to call it. But they did quietly sign those papers, and it wasn't anything we discussed. I think denial was a very strong coping mechanism in my
Hmm.
family. Irish Catholic from Boston, a bit, they called us Bics, Boston Irish Catholic. And, I had another whole year to go. And then when it came time to leave, it was terrible. It was awful. I had to leave. My mother was in the hospital. My mother was manic depressive. She was in a psychiatric hospital. My brother was getting married. My father, it was just, and I just leave. I had to call my sister-in-law and say, take me to the airport. I'm out of here. I
Yeah.
never said goodbye to anybody in my family. And I got down to Washington and I got on an airplane and I got to Viet Nam. And this guy that I knew from Walter Reed, he talked me into making a phone call to my parents after I'd been there about a month or so.
Hmm.
So it was very hard. So yeah, yeah, how did your family react? It was very strange. So then when I came home, I don't think they had any idea what to do with me. But I think they realized that they weren't going to have the power over to control me. I mean, their hope was I was going to stay in Cohasset, be a nurse, work in the nursing home, take care of my mother. And within days, I think somehow they realized we'll be lucky if she stays alive because she's,
Hmm.
you know, um,
And
so
didn't you
I don't know.
say,
Go ahead.
I feel like I remember from our past conversation that you had brothers who didn't end up going. And so it was this interesting tension that you decided to go. And I can't believe you had to have something signed at 20 years old. That's just a really interesting fact.
Hmm.
Your parents still had to give permission. Wow.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that was not only felt by my parents that they had the, that they had to give me permission. I couldn't go to, they wouldn't let me go to college. But even this Army recruiter is telling me, you got to get permission from your parents.
Hmm.
I don't know. But then, when I came home, I didn't tell you, when I came home, my father was active in the Legion, the American Legion, and the parade, right there. And within a couple of years, or maybe less, I don't know, he asked me to be the speaker at the end of the parade, the keynote speaker. And I said, I remember being very angry. I was still very angry about this war that was still going on. And I said, okay, but I'm not going to be your typical keynote speaker saying, war, rah, 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 look at us, we're heroes.
Hmm.
I told him, I said, I'm going to tell the truth. I'm going to tell you about the atrocities of war and the high costs of war. And my father, he didn't try to talk me out of it. He was just silent. He just said, okay. And I wrote this speech about the high costs of war. And
Yeah.
that was the beginning of my speaking endeavors. Look at me today, right? 50 years later.
But you were honest. You were honest from the beginning with all that you had
Yeah.
endured and saw your fellow service persons endure.
Mm-hmm.
There's a question in here. There's a lot of comments that I hope that you'll linger over when we're done, because I think that you moved a lot of people with your stories. Um, there was a question about being, I think it was, if you asked the question and I didn't ask it, there's a lot in here I'm trying to see. It was about how should we, um, knowing that we're all service providers, what would you want service providers to know about you if you were being cared for by a hospice palliative service provider, and the way that your story as a Vietnam veteran nurse has impacted your life? Are there things that we should know that would be helpful as we care for Vietnam veterans?
Um,
Yeah, Kelly put it succinctly. Given your experience, what would you want your care providers to offer you? That's the question I was trying to find.
yeah. I maybe I can tell another story and that'll help answer that. When my friend Chrissy got this leukemia, I remember she called me in June and she had a husband, Tom, and two kids grown. And this was maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And she said, I've got this. And they say, if I don't take the treatment, I'm going to be dead in 6 months. If I do take it, who knows, but whatever. So I would talk to her. And then at some point, I think Tom, her husband, called me the day after Thanksgiving. And he said, they've just told us that they have nothing more they can do for Chrissy. And she wants to see you.
Mm.
I was the only person she asked for. And so I got on a plane the next day, and Tom picked me up at the airport, took me over to see her in the hospital. But I sat there and I held her hand, and she had written a chapter in a book, and I read a page from it that was about a boy. And the tears came down, that she said, I will never leave another boy again. She had sent him over to X-ray. I mean, and anyway, he died in X-ray, and this is all written in the book. I mean, and I held her hand, and I had a picture there of us, I think, and then I said to her, Chrissy, you will always, always be remembered. I will always, always, always feel your spirit. Always, always. And that's about all I could do, And she wanted me to keep I got a sense she wanted me to keep, but in touch with Tom. And Tom, anyway, you can imagine how sad all that was. But, but I think it's significant, isn't it, that on her deathbed, she's asking for another Vietnam vet.
Mm.
I think it's significant. So I don't know if you, I don't, I don't know, I guess. I don't know. I don't know if you can say, well, tell me if Vietnam still bothers you or something. I mean, I don't know if they would tell you. I mean, I don't know. And that's why I'm sitting here thinking, if I had somebody there, would that be any healing effect for me to be talking about Vietnam? I don't know. I don't know. Um, but we had mentioned, Becky, how I respond to when I see a Vietnam vet. I don't say to them, welcome home, for a number of reasons. But some people say that Vietnam vets got PTSD or whatever because they didn't have a parade. And I don't think that's true. I think we would have gotten PTSD even with a parade, because the anguish or the PTSD is within. It's within. The healing had to come from within. I had to do my own healing work, whatever that was. And to think that a parade where somebody's going to say, oh, welcome, you killed people, you were great.
Mm.
I don't, you're a hero. I think you're so great. I mean, it just didn't add up for me. Now, so when I see a Vietnam vet, and if he's wearing, I was telling you, a guy in his tux and he had his ribbons on that I recognized, or if I see a hat, I'm a Vietnam vet. But I remember this happened to me a couple of years ago. I was at a formal thing, and there was somebody's husband there, and I saw the ribbons, and I went up to him and I said, how are you doing? Are you okay? How are you doing? I'm a Vietnam vet myself. And I think that was more helpful than anything.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm just telling you, I don't know all the answers, but
I appreciate what you're sharing. I think that a lot of people on this call, it's our hope to honor veterans in the way that they would feel honored. And I think that we miss the mark a lot. And what I'm hearing is listening, asking, are you okay? Acknowledging that they served, but almost being cautious about welcoming home or being celebratory because we don't know what stories they're holding, but be willing to hold the stories with them, and that there is a special relationship between one veteran to another, and at end of life, especially having veterans available that can listen.
help them heal or heal each other. And so, not to minimize the work you're doing with the Welcome Home Day in March. And we talked about this. I think the excellent work you're doing with that is you're putting veterans together
Mm.
because they're special. Not so, but and not that they're heroes or war heroes, but that there's, anyone. I think it's become more acceptable these days, right? That anyone that's had to go to Vietnam, they're special. They were put through an experience that the rest of you all never experienced. But I've been to couple of those welcome home Vietnam get-togethers, and oh my God, they're very meaningful. They're very, very, very meaningful. They're very meaningful. Um, and even if even and everybody's going to react differently to it. If it just means a guy gets to talk to another guy that was there, or, oh, you were in DaNang, I was in DaNang, yeah, I remember that. That kind of stuff. That can be very healing. And when I talk to my Vietnam friends here from the vet center, and they go to the vet center to a group, they have a group, and they call it the DMZ or the something group, platoon group or something. But what I'm hearing is they find that to be the most healing of anything, better than drugs, better than anything else. And that's what they do for years. They just keep it doesn't end. It's not like a 6-week group therapy thing. It goes on. So if you have any opportunity to put veterans together in a group, once a week or whatever, I think that would be very helpful to them.
Thank you. That's that is helpful to hear. And one of my volunteers is a Vietnam veteran and recently has said, let's pilot these squad meetings, is what he's calling them. Let's offer squad meetings in different places so people can gather and just connect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I had a question about you mentioned earlier, and I hadn't heard this, and apparently some other people haven't either, that when people were serving, that there was actually a heroin problem in Vietnam for
Mm.
service members as part of their coping with their service. And
Yep. Very much so. Very much so.
so some people came back to the United States probably addicted. So that was
Mm-hmm.
another hurdle. Wow.
Yep. Yep. And of course, marijuana, and there was some kind of speed over there. I mean, the marijuana was so prevalent. I was the only person I knew that didn't smoke marijuana. I mean, the nurses, the docs, everybody. So, yeah, it was easier to get heroin than it was any other, and a drink, probably. I mean,
Oh my
of
goodness.
course, the alcohol, although at the alcohol, I mean, you could buy a gin and tonic or whatever for a quarter. I mean, it was very, yeah, that was prevalent too. That was, yeah.
There's a question about why do you think the rate of death by suicide is still so high in the military?
Right, 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 right. You know, I mean, it's because of what we're talking about. If I didn't have all the professional help that I had,
Hmm.
I don't know where I would have ended up. I don't know if I would have, but imagine these are guys that were 18 years old over there in Vietnam and killing people, killing Vietnamese people,
Hmm.
dead with guns and M6. Then they come back here and they're expected to just readjust, refit, just fit in, and they never never had the professional help or you know, that's why Chrissy and I, when we first came back, we helped the vet centers. We're just starting to open up, but we believed if we could get veterans into that, we were more cared more about helping the vets. We didn't realize that we were messed up, but the vet centers were helping veterans with that. But so I think, and the other thing I'll tell you is I think that I noticed this maybe about 10 years ago that when the men were getting ready, retired, now they're in their 60s, right? Before 10 years, that was when the suicide hit a lot, the depression, because they would be reliving, they would have this time to relive this stuff. And this stuff would come up again. And I think that had something to do with it. But I think they just, yeah. Why is it so high? Because of the awful things they did this when they were in Vietnam and the awful things they witnessed over there.
And there's a need for services, and that just exemplifies how important the VA services are. Thank you to the VA staff that are on this call. Um, and they're
Yes.
underutilized, I think. And
Well, and even in my experience, I mean, I'm going to be honest and truthful. I went to the VA and I went to the active duty military for help, and they didn't help me. This was in 91, and I remember the priest saying to me, "Well, everybody comes back with a little of that. You'll be fine." This is 20 years later. And then another psychiatrist said to me, "Oh, meet me in my garage and I'll adjust your meds." And that really made me mad. Okay, I'll adjust your meds. And and I was really anti-meds for myself anyway, especially when I get into to treatment, this therapy. Because my thinking was, why would I take meds? I'm going to cloud up my mind when I'm trying to figure out what's going on in my mind.
Mhm.
So I I was just appalled with this Iraq thing where they would send guys back over and over again on meds. And in Vietnam, nobody ever had to go back. You did your year over there, that was all you had to do. But the point being, I was thinking about, you're going to send them back with PTSD on meds.
Hmm.
Imagine, how are you ever going to get, this straight in your head?
One of these questions that relates a little bit to what you just shared is, what are your thoughts about addiction issues as vets are now dying and need narcotics at the end of life?
Well, I mean, I think I think addiction isn't the problem. It's the PTSD. And the providers are treating the PTSD with drugs. This is again my personal opinion, but and you keep, as everybody knows, it's a nurse or that's a provider, that you keep treating them with narcotics, you got to give more and more and more. There's a tolerance, there's a dependent, and so I think that's, you got to get into the cause of this pain. So some provider, doctor, if you go in complaining of pain, they give them a narcotic. Well, maybe it's a different kind of pain that you haven't even touched on.
Mhm. Well, Jane, I hope that I know that you, I think, have to get off at 12:20, if I remember from what you shared when we talked earlier this week. So I just wanted to open it up for a quick moment to see if there's any other questions that somebody has for you in this final few minutes. And I want to encourage, if you haven't put your name and your who you work for or who you're volunteering for in the chat, please do that, so that I can get the attendance correct. So thank you all so much.
Yes.
Any questions for Jane?
There's one question I think we missed here. Um, it was about, how does it feel with these, to have to do this, talk about this?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, how do you relate to these memories and experiences now? What it's like for you to revisit these photos? Um, I mean, I'm usually I'm okay. I'm okay, but it does hit me, I have to okay, to to present some objective data. Since I had the therapy, this psychotherapy, in 93, 91 to 5 years there. So anyway, I've been okay. I haven't had an episode of depression. Um, I, I don't drink alcohol. I'm okay. I mean, in general, I'm okay, and I haven't. And so to bring this stuff up, if I'm helping others, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it, and I'm very grateful that probably that people would want to listen to these stories. Um, yeah, yeah. Maybe it's therapeutic. I think maybe it might be therapeutic for me, and it may be part of that since I've done well anyway. Is helping veterans, helping, serving. How can I serve? How can I serve others with these stories, with what I did? And I think that's probably is helpful to me.
Thank you. Any other questions in this last couple of minutes?
I'll ask one. Um, there's this kind of this, oh, hi. My name's Quincy. I'm a true volunteer. There's this thread about kind of the importance of the peer in all of this. Um, I would assume kind of coming back both like as a woman in the military and then like going back to school when most of your kind of immediate peers are, kids who just came out of high school.
Mhm.
Um, was that isolating? Or kind of how did that feel, like not being able to really be able to connect to everyone that's like physically around you? Like you had Chrissy, but it's one thing to
No,
have.
well, when I got out to Colorado, right. But you bring up a very good point, Quincy. When in Indiana, here I was in Indianapolis, Indiana. Anybody been to Indiana? It's little did I had never, but so I'm a woman. I'm a Vietnam vet, and I'm from Massachusetts with this strange accent, and I'm taking an English class with I think it was the English comp class, and the teacher this asked us to write a paragraph on what we did over the summer.
Hmm.
And so you get it, Quincy, huh? But yeah, I felt a little, but I did. I wrote my story, what I did over the summer. Yeah, and oh my God. And then she asked me to read it in class. Now, first of all, I had terrible fear of public speaking to begin with. And now I'm going to read this paragraph about how I took care of boys dying in this war or being mutilated. So, and I started crying. I mean, I don't think I got through it. But anyway, point being, I didn't feel like I fit in there in Indianapolis at all, Indiana. But thank God I had the strength and the help of that priest to get me out there with my friends. I think so many veterans don't get to make that connection.
Mhm.
I mean, maybe that's something you could ask them. Have you connected with any of your Vietnam friends? Is there some way? Can I help you reach out to them?
Mhm.
Um, like my friend Chrissy, that I was the last one she wanted to talk to. Because I think that, Quincy, what you're getting at is the feeling of isolation and aloneness and separateness and different. I'm different from the rest. I'm different from everybody else in the world. And that connection helps me get over that. So maybe that would be something you could do.
Thank you.
Hmm.
Green, thank you so much for giving us the space to be a student of yours today, a student of your story, and the way that your words and your story will impact us and help us be better present for those around us. My takeaway, I think, is that I want to be a connector. I want to help see veterans in my community and connect them with other veterans in my community, and that those circles are sacred spaces. And maybe I'll be privileged to be a fly on the wall, but that those veterans connecting with other veterans is where good work happens. So Thank you so much for your time. And there's just more than what I can read, just messages. I'll have to copy and email you the chat because people were very grateful for your wisdom and your vulnerability. What you're doing is making a difference. The way you spent your time today matters. And I just encourage everybody to do what they need to do just to ground themselves after this because it feels, I know I just feel like grateful. And also, my heart is heavy for the
Mhm.
pain that is unseen still, in our Vietnam veterans, especially. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
See you later.